My name is Solon McCurdy. I've met some of you, hope to get to know all of you better through the course of the next couple of days. And I have the distinct privilege of serving as the Chief Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer for Symetra Financial, based out of Bellevue, Washington, which is near Seattle. I would encourage all of you, when you have spare time, to come visit Seattle in the summer. In a couple of months, it will be beautiful. It will be stunning, I promise you. But for today and the time that we have together, I am joined by some wonderful people who are practitioners in this space around equity and inclusion, who I truly believe will share some wonderful experiences, perspective, and give you some things to think about and that will resonate. We know many of you have joined us today, and there's the other mic. Thank you. We know many of you have joined us because some of you are practitioners yourself. Some of you do engage in this work in meaningful ways. And while many of you may have done that for years prior, what we also know when we think about this industry and the practice of equity and inclusion is that in the last few years, there has actually been a pretty dramatic surge, particularly in the corporate space, with practitioners coming into corporations, consultants being hired and asked to give social and intellectual capital, sometimes unmade, to do this work, right? And to move organizations that frankly were not built to act in these ways. And there have been millions of dollars invested in some of these organizations and practices to move this forward in a very short amount of time. And yet we are also finding and knowing that the expectation around success and quantifiable outcomes is high. The expectation around rigor and endurance for practitioners is high. And we also live in a space right now where, once again, those who are on the front lines engaging in this practice, in building agency and justice for individuals who do not have it, are now under attack, right, in many ways. And so we want to provide you the opportunity to engage in this conversation with us, to hear the perspective of these practitioners here, not all from the same industry, from varied industries, but to really dig into what this means, what it looks like, and how we're moving it forward in an evolving environment. And so we hope that you will find this helpful. We hope this will resonate, and we hope, time permitting, there will be a space for thoughtful questions to engage with the audience further. So before we get started, any outstanding questions, logistics that we need to cover that I may have not hit? All right. Well, we are joined by Kimberly, Ashanti, and Trey, respectively, and the way we will let them introduce themselves in 2 minutes or less is by answering a question. First, introducing yourself, what you do, who you are, and then really speaking to this idea of this compelling interest, right? Like, what is it for you personally? What is it about you and your why that you do this work, and what has drawn you to the particular position you're in now? Would you care to start, Kimberly?
Okay, sure. Hello. Is this on? I think it says it's on. It is? Can you hear me? Hello. Yeah, it is. Okay. Rough start, but we'll get there. My name is Kimberly Sharif, and I'm the Executive Vice President for Strategy for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at Penguin Random House, book publisher. I have been there for 2+ years. My anniversary will be in May, 3 years. And this is my first foray into the publishing industry. I'm a lawyer by training, and I've done really entertainment and nonprofit arts for most of my career. My one claim to fame before coming to Penguin Random House was having negotiated an 8-book children's book deal for my prior employer, American Valley Theater. So that was, kind of a little bit of my entree into this particular job, but why I actually switched from being more of a, multi-subject matter professional to a single subject matter professional focused on DEI is truly because of really my own journey. Right? I started as an attorney at a law firm where the presupposition was that I was not an attorney at all. Right? There's nothing wrong with any of the other jobs at this law firm, but no one ever thought that I was an attorney. And then when I went on to, move to different, law firm jobs, et cetera, I felt more empowered to try to make sure that the new attorneys coming in didn't have the same experience. Ultimately, I was able to go and work at Black Entertainment Television. The entire platform was made to allow space on center stage for artists and other professionals who hadn't had the opportunities given to them. So that felt deeply, deeply in this space. I then went on to, this large, predominantly white, nonprofit arts organization. And it was just so clear to me that in order for them to survive, frankly, we needed to be reaching much broader audiences. We needed to be much more welcoming. And we needed our leadership to better represent the entire city of New York. Actually, it's an international, right, organization. We needed to better reflect the people that we were serving. So I was able to kind of parlay from the legal to the business kind of think tank side. And that is how I also got to ABT. The person who ran the think tank brought me to ABT, did operations there, in ballet, as you can imagine. Not great representation. But I was able to create a program called ABT Rise, which stands for Representation and Inclusion, Sustained Excellence. And that is pretty much the basis, the why to this work, right? I truly believe that if you have representation and people are set up to thrive and reach their full potential, every single business and entity can be excellent.
And I have to just comment on the fact that I think we're also privileged to be sitting next to a celebrity affiliated with BET and someone who has an exceptional style today. I mean,
This guy, I was just like, yes.
Okay, I feel like I got my full life together. But then, Ashanti.
Okay, so that's a hard act to follow. I am not a celebrity. But hello, everyone. So happy to be with you all and so excited about sharing this space with you all over the next several minutes. I'm really looking forward to the engaging conversation. I am the Vice President of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at Global Atlantic Financial Company. That is a financial services organization, also part of KKR and private equity. We are located in Hartford, Connecticut, where I am born and raised, but also born and raised to immigrant parents. And so that's a part of my story and a part of my journey. I have been within human resources for many years, about 15 plus years, and I actually stumbled into this space one accident. So I was a student attending Hampton University, so I'm also a proud HBCU graduate, and was struggling choosing between business and HR. A mentor of mine said, what about HR, right? Business and psychology, what about HR? And so I stepped into it and I've never looked back. Really enjoy the space, really enjoy identifying people's solutions to business problems, right? And that's how I think about human resources and what we do. Throughout my career in various roles within HR, so I've done compensation, I've done the HR business partner role, I've done employee relations and employment law, and have transitioned into diversity, equity, inclusion. Throughout my journey, I have always had people that have created space for me and showcase varying levels of agency. And that is why I do this work. As also a first generation college student, I've had a lot of people who have opened doors for me along the way. And the more and more I engage with the young people, and I also think about my own story, access, exposure, and opportunity is really what makes a difference in terms of how we continue to thrive. And so it's personally important for me to be a champion and steward of this work, to ensure that we are creating spaces for people, to ensure that we are giving a voice to the voiceless, and to ensure that we continue to evolve with the times and the ever-changing climate. And so inside and outside of work, very involved in the community, sit on boards, and this is something that I get paid for, that I actually enjoy. So that's a little bit about me and why I do the work that I do.
And then Trey, how would you like to follow that? Sorry.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Let me straighten it. I am the founder and director of leadership and culture development at Think for Good, based in Atlanta, Georgia. Yeah. I've been in the nonprofit space and leadership development space over 20 years, I would say, at this particular point. But I think the journey started really, I would say, first year at American Red Cross. At that time, I was one of the youngest black males, definitely youngest person on staff at that time. But also led a team of about 6 or 7 people as we worked on what we call the Together We Prepare program. The reason why that's really important, because we looked at, if you think about where all the disasters were occurring in Metro Atlanta, or in major cities, a lot of those weren't necessarily big natural disasters, they were home-made disasters. And so we started to look at it in a different way, not necessarily looking at why what's happening in these moments, but actually why. Is it something that is culturally connected in this space? That journey took me on a couple different places. I started doing leadership development and teaching all across the country, just from doing that work. Ended up moving over to Points of Life for a while, where I started doing community development, which is really interesting. And then I started to notice the little bit of pushback. And I would say that as we're creating programs for people that look like me, folks that have been in the same neighborhood, I am born and raised in Atlanta, where we are serving, we have no people leading that look like me. And it was a very interesting conversation over a series of, a couple of years actually, where I would get the program idea, or we would come up with an idea, and we never really had people come into the room. And so it was a lot of assumptions. There was a lot of bias. And there's a place where my office was. It was called The Bluff. Atlanta, you probably know where that is. With the state. So, thinking about where that is, it's like, well, we're going to do some things in The Bluff. And I said, you've never invited anyone from The Bluff to actually come into the organization, to actually advise. And there was an old adage that we used to say that something that's not built with us is probably not for us. And so at that point, I started to experiment. If they didn't want to do it the way I wanted to do it, what I thought was the best way, I started experimenting. And God bless, I started working with Morehouse College at one point, and started Spelman, and now we've actually centered there into our leadership philosophy based upon those experiences. I'll stop right here.
Well, thank you for giving us a wonderful introduction to all three of you. Trey, also just wanted to name the fact that you are somehow strategically coordinated with Ashanti, so thank you for setting this up. I see the box. There's the solid group chat. Fantastic group chat. Hey, sometimes wonderful minds think alike. Something that I love that you all mentioned was beyond just the lived experience that brought you to this work and the real kind of sense of personal responsibility, you've all in some fashion mentioned the people side of this, giving people agency in a place, serving in the ways that are meaningful and helpful. So let's round the conversation there, a start, and then move forward. When you think about the people side of this, say the workforce and the workplace, how might we be kind of balancing some of the new dynamics in that? When you think about how we serve people through DEI, kind of what are the evolving trends that we're seeing and pieces that we're seeing to make sure that we're actually serving people in the ways that are needed? Ashanti, would you care to start and then we'll go Trey?
Yeah, sure. And it's so funny. I was just in another session, and a part of the commentary was about how the world continues to evolve and change. And the world is changing, and that's constant. But there are some things that are currently changing that's really having an impact of what we do within the diversity, equity, inclusion space. And so there are a few, and please let me know if I start to ramble. But I would say that the first is, the reality for the United States is that, by 2055, there will be no ethnic or racial majority, right? And so our country in itself is continuing to become more diverse. So how do we continue to show up for the communities that we support? The second is even how we define family is changing, right? So if we think about how we define family back in the 50s, it was very straightforward, kind of a narrow view. But now when we think about our employees and how they show up to the workplace, family means something different to everyone. And so we have to think about that in terms of how we curate very inclusive and personalized benefits for the people that come to our workplace, because we can no longer base them on that traditional structure of just, a mom and a dad. We have single moms, and we have homosexual and heterosexual relationships. We have people who have their fur babies, right? Like, there's so many different ways that people define family now. We have to think about that. There's also a lot of remnants of COVID-19, right? And so this continued push around a hybrid, remote environment and how we create personal connections within that space continues to be important. And then I also think that as many of us have worked within these remote environments, we're also starting to see the physical and emotional impacts of that, right? And so, there are higher levels of stress being reported. There are higher levels of workplace conflict, and many other things that we need to pay attention to in terms of how we continue to create very dynamic spaces that support that. And so one of the things that's very top of mind for us is well-being, right? And so when you talk about what's important to employees right now, well-being is also at the top of that list. And those are just some of the things that are starting to change in terms of our current workforce. The other reality is when we think about how we continue to think about talent, right? The landscape is changing in terms of, different generations looking for different ways to advance their career, right? Everyone is not looking for the same way in terms of how they advance their careers. And so as we think about how we source, attract, and engage talent, we got to think about that a little bit differently, right? Because those traditional methods are no longer working. And then when you think about generations holistically, we have 5 generations in the workplace right now who all have different upbringing experiences. They show up differently. They expect different levels of support. So how do we upskill our leaders, right, to support the different levels and generations and how they think and operate in an effective way, right? And so we want to continue to make sure that we are creating a space for all. And so those are just some of the dynamics that I think of on top of mind.
One of the ways I'm interested in some of your actions. So I can see that, while you may not be in the traditional space that Ashanti's in, you have some shared experience with that.
Absolutely. So I think one of the tips you hit it on the veil, tongue of the head. I think one of the things that we kept seeing is basically this push of wellness, right? And so there's wellness warriors all throughout different organizations right now, wellness captains, and then different groups. But also one of the things I started to maybe push as a trend is actually being more mindful. A lot of mindfulness and sparking in conjunction as a part of wellness as well. One of the things that's the reason I thought that was really important is because when we talk about bias, we talk about stereotypes, or we talk about looking at how to meet what are our basic assumptions. We have to start somewhere, and everything starts from within. And so we start getting people to start to understand what's actually happening with them on a day-to-day basis, on an hour-to-hour basis. And that can affect how you actually respond. Should you actually take that reading today? Do you need a wellness day? Do you need 60 seconds before we start this next meeting? All of those things are part of that conversation. And that's some of the things that we're seeing lift up, and we want to continue to lift up as they are kind of transitioning over these next 3 to 5 years.
Kimberly, anything that you wanted to add?
Sure. We have been looking a lot at, I'm going to, pull this thread through, how we attract, of course, how we retain, but how we attract talent too, and how we interact with the talent that we're trying to attract. So we have looked at job descriptions. We looked at a thing called the hiring manager's toolkit, right, that allows our hiring managers to think about the ways that they interact with new talent. And then we also thought about onboarding, right? We've created an onboarding bot that in this hybrid world allows us to, not only have the personal touch, but also to have a few pings here and there, reminders to say, how was your first day? We're glad you're here, right? Because that sense of isolation that, I think is starting to permeate, especially with new professionals. We're trying to overcome that from the start and get people really entrenched in a way that feels connected. So to me, it is looking at the entire life cycle when we think about our workplace, workforce, and our culture in order to make sure that there are connections at each juncture.
Here. And I appreciate how all of you have named aspects of that life cycle in some ways, but really that idea of connection and wellness, because even For Symetra, we're a completely remote environment. People expect to have a relationship. They expect to be connected. They expect a sense of community. And to your point, we have to find unique ways to draw upon that. But they also expect to not just be hired, but grow and promoted.
Right.
And then I think we're all trying to really figure that out, but maybe in different places around what that can look like, particularly when we think about people who are Black and brown and from places that we come from. With that being a place to set the tone, I do want to shift it, because sometimes the conversation with DEI can only stay within people. It's in terms of the workforce. And we know that this work needs to be holistic across our organizations, across our enterprise, across the efforts that we are in. So what are some of the other strategic priorities that come to mind for you? And just to draw upon an example, like when I think about what's happening in Symetra, not to make it about me, but we are unpacking what it means to think about this in the context of our marketplace. So when we go to market with products around retirement, workforce benefits, and life insurance, how can we ensure that everyone sees themselves having the financial freedom they not only need but deserve? Because sometimes they have been marginalized and not had it. And thinking about that in a way that builds authentic relationships with people where they are based on the needs they have. But that's us. And so I'm curious what comes up for you when you think about community, when you think about marketplace, when you think about your consumers in ways that really do project on equitable and inclusive practices. Trey, let's start with you, and then Sheriff Askin.
I would say the first thing that came to mind was, if you think about it, we typically hire people and basically people that we like or are like, right? We don't like to do business with assholes. Excuse my language, right? We like people who want to do business with. And that also can get us in a little bit of a trap. And so one of the things that we do when we're looking at, like, if we work with a nonprofit partner, it's not necessarily just the person that you know, it's the people that you do not know. Going outside of your assumptions, outside of your first lens, so to speak. We try to get people to get into a place where they can start looking at who are the vendors that we need to chat to not only will actually connect with, but also start to attract, so they start to grow up to work with us as well. When it comes down to different communities and different stakeholders, not the typical same leaders that are in the same communities. Right now, a lot of times in the nonprofit space, people still to this day, they go to the church, right? They go to the Black church, or they go to the large community church and try to give a donation, speaking that way. But there's other community members that have a different side of the community, a different voice that everyone needs to connect. So we try to get people into that place of like, don't look at your first lens, think about your second lens. And think of the people that you probably would not consider. They should probably come on your list.
Kimberly, I'm curious what your reaction is.
Sure. To carry on from what you just said too, because our mission is to create stories, books for everyone, right? That's a lofty, lofty mission. But in order to do that, we really do need to understand, right, everyone, and try to have capability within our midst that allows us to connect together, with this very, very broad audience that we're trying to serve. So in our DEI strategy, we actually have a content and marketplace pillar. And we've done a few things. One, I love data. So our first kind of section of our content and marketplace pillar is to measure, right? And our main push was to figure out our contributor demographics. And by contributors, I mean authors, illustrators, editors, etc. And so we set in place a technological mechanism to gather that data. So then we can better figure out who we need to connect with, what communities have not been represented, what stories have not been told, so that we can expand our reach. The second thing that we are doing is just getting information from those of us inside the company, particularly our editorial staff, to find out what the barriers are, right? The systemic barriers that are within our company, within our industry, so that we can start to figure out the mechanisms to tear those barriers down, right? And create this flow of creativity and connection that will allow us to just share more with the world. And then thirdly, we put on these, we call them multicultural marketing summits, to equip those who are marketing our place, right? to learn how to do some grassroots work and connecting with community organizations, all the way to, where are we spending our big ad dollars, right? What communities are we trying to connect with, and what are the best ways to connect with those communities, because it will be different across the board. And so that's kind of the forward-facing work that we're trying to do in order to make sure that we create books for them.
Before Shanti answers, I want to make sure you're all still there. You're still with us? Yes. Colleague Font, you still with us? Yes. Okay. I know you're working on your questions too, so we've got about 15 minutes, so get ready. I might call on you too. But Shanti, I know that you have some ideas around multicultural marketplaces.
Yes, and I'll be quick and answer that, but also take another spin on the question. One of the things that we're very proud of at Global Atlantic is our multicultural initiative, which is really rooted in making sure that our producers and our agents are targeting diverse communities, that we're translating our materials in common languages in terms of those that we support, that we are equipping them with cultural awareness training, right, as they are engaging with individuals for good business. And so we want to ingrain it there. But we also challenge who we do business with to also making sure that they are prioritizing diversity, equity, inclusion. And so we want to make sure that if you are doing business with us, you also align with our values. And so what does that look like? That looks like if we are going out with an RFP for certain vendors, what does your D&I strategy look like, right? How are you thinking about that? When we think about our suppliers or our vendors, we're looking at how can we make sure that we are working with a diverse group of individuals. When we think about different spaces within our individual markets group, we want to make sure, again, that we're challenging those who are also looking to build with us, that they're also doing the work, right? And so it's important for us to also be stewards of this space and influence our peers and others to put in that same effort. So just wanted to add that there in terms of we want to definitely influence it as a business, but we also want to encourage everyone else to include it in the business too. So
I love how you drew upon really this idea of the real business imperative, but in such a way that's rooted in our values, right? This is not only about the bottom line and about the policies and about more financial revenue. It really is about the values of our companies and our efforts and organizations. And I want to put something in front of us that is contradictory to that, right? This idea that DEI in the political context, in the social context that we're in, is dangerous, that it is actually a disservice to us, that it is actually disruptive to our industries and our companies. And at times, it really has fallen under attack. We could go down the list, and I won't wear you out with that now, about the people that have been targeted and laid off and removed from positions after a very short amount of time. And now, particularly, depending on what state you're in, you may not have a voice because of the political dynamics that certain individuals are positioned in, even as part of their campaign. So, to answer the question, one, do you see DEI as being under attack? And whether or not, how do we navigate this now in this political season, move forward until the elections?
And I can certainly talk about that. I definitely think D&I is under attack. Won't be bashful about that. It is. And one of the things that I always encourage my leaders as, the landscape changes, what shouldn't change is our values. And if we believe in our values as the tenet of success to our business, then that's what we anchor onto, right? And so that should not matter, what's happening externally. If this is what we hold to be true, then let's continue to do the work. And so I often bring it back to who we are as a company. And what you'll start to see is companies that were doing it from a marketing just looks good perspective, right? When George Floyd happened and everyone was just throwing all this money. I mean, we saw a huge influx in new CDOs and all of the things, right? Billions of dollars. What you're starting to see is organizations that are pulling back from this. The question is, how committed were you to this, right? How committed were you to this work? If now you're kind of moving that ship, right, based again on just what's trending or what's happening right now. And so I think it's something that we should all pay attention to. and the consumer and the certain workforce are also paying attention. Who's staying steadfast in this work, right? And so I think that is something very important and critical to watch, but I'll leave any additional comments.
When I stepped in the door at Penguin Random House, I used a phrase, DEI in the DNA. That is what I believe all companies should have. But it's not just because Penguin Random House has remained very committed to this work. It's because what the essence of DEI is truly just good business practice, right? Diversity is simply making sure that your workforce is representative of the audiences that you serve. You can connect them better, you can create products that better serve their needs. It is, financial success, innovation, all those things are fed by having diverse perspectives around the table, right? Equity is really just giving your employees what they need to succeed. And what business, I will argue that no business out there doesn't want their employees to operate at their optimal levels, right? So if you give someone what they need, which may vary, right? He's talking about equity, you are just strengthening the foundation of your business. And then in terms of inclusion, it's really just telling our employees that they are valued, right? That they have a place there, that what they're doing is important. And that, again, it takes away the time spent that you feel that you're insecure, right, in your position. You're on a solid foundation, and you actually spend more of your time doing what will produce profit, right, and spread the word about your brand, etc. So it really comes down to good business practice that has now been labeled as DEI and is valued as such. So I really hope that people can start to talk about the ways that this work is integrated into the basic decision-making processes that make the business thrive. And hope that helps us weather the storm.
It's like it just really sound good, fundamental business practice.
All of this.
And thank Trey, I want you to react, and I know people are eager to ask questions, so I'm going to give you a quick two-part question after you react to it.
Sure. So the way I thought about it is every company wants to be innovative. Every company has to be innovative so it can stay in business. And innovation happens at the intersections of thought, people, different places, and so. And if they're not iterating, they could probably die. So innovation and iterating is what they have to do on a constant basis. So I think as a business practice, if you're not paying attention, you're not bringing in people, you're not looking at your customers, your clients, and methods, bringing them in and find out what is actually needed in the field, and how can we reflect that back out, and how they're going to be dying. And you look at history, you see that. So I just stop there. What you got?
So, such an interesting word choice, because when you talk about kind of taking care of the business and sustainability, and you use the word death, sometimes we pour so much into this work that we don't necessarily think about our sustainability as practitioners. Sure, man. And so I'm curious, when you even move back to the idea of like wellness, in taking care of the business and the initiatives and strategic priorities, how are you taking care of self so that you can be your very best in all the ways, not just for you, probably for your better half too, right? How are you showing up to take care of yourself mentally, emotionally, so that you can endure and persist and get to the goals you want in DEI?
Well, I'll tell you that prayer and meditation is part of my day-to-day routine. Let's start there. There's something that we have to make sure. I can't take of it. We can't pour out anything that you don't already have. And so, and whether that be grace, whether that be mercy, whether that be support, whether that be encouragement, and so we start there and try to find ways that we can be as centered as possible. And I think that's really important. So for me, I try to figure out a way every single day to just breathe, to just do something that centers me in the morning. In some way also, third part, I would say is do something that is, I would say, counterphobic on a regular basis. What I mean by that is do something that kind of scares you. something that actually that you need to be a little bit more brave on, something that you feel a little intimidated about. Put something in routine that you could do, on a week basis. You start to open that up a little bit. And so when it comes down to those challenges where you are stressed, you've built a bit of threshold, you build a bit of strength, different level of strength, and I think that helps as well. It kind of keep me as stable as possible. So when I show up humble, they feel that love that I represent.
Brother, I feel like I just had a whole sermon and a life coach session in like 50 seconds there. Thank you for that gift. Ashanti, please continue.
I'll be quick because I know that we're getting close on time, but I would say it's three things. One, make sure you have a tribe, right? Make sure that you have a tribe and a support group that you can be authentic with, that you can, when you have those moments and you just need to be real, honest, and kind of just take it all off, make sure that you have your people that you can go to. The second thing I would say is spaces like this, right? So continuing to look for opportunities or spaces that can also reignite you, challenge or share kind of best practices around what you're doing. So I always am thoughtful about coming to spaces like this a few times a year. And then the last thing I would say, have something that you're looking forward to just from a personal enjoyment perspective. So I love to travel, right? And so every few times throughout the year, I make sure that I plan a trip. And so I travel personally at least 4 times a year, quarterly. And that also, it gives me something to look forward to. So those are the 3 things I've got to talk about.
Well, we are kindred spirits because a good trip does, it's the South. I say keep dreaming, right? As long as I have a dream, as long as I'm thinking about something else I want to learn or know, that is what energizes me. And admittedly, I'm actually not that good at the true kind of self-care that I think it does take to persevere through this work. I need to get better. But that is my foundation in understanding that there is so much here in the world that is to be experienced. And thank you so much for that.
And I love that you, in that moment, said, it's okay, like, to acknowledge that sometimes we don't take care of ourselves. Because I will tell you, my 16-year-old daughter would check me and say, Dad, come sit down and watch this terrible K-drama with me for the next 6 hours. And then maybe we can go see a Marvel movie too if you feel like paying for it. But that gives me so much joy in those moments where it's hard, right? But we have to be intentional about taking care of ourselves and letting others remind us that we need to do it. So we have another question. Well, for the sake of time, let's pull it there because I feel the energy is good. And I'm curious, what are some of your reactions, thoughts, reflections? I'm going to try to do this Oprah thing real quick. Can I get
Sure. Yep.
Save me for fall.
Yes, my name is Emmy, and I was actually curious. It seems that a lot of DEI work is centered particularly in large-scale corporations inside the HR organization, which is not a revenue-driving part of the company. And I have had a very intimate experience with this, and I've noticed that when revenue is threatened, DEI is the first to go because they're trying to diminish their HR costs. I was wondering if you guys could speak to how you are strategizing to place DEI at the core of revenue-driving business activity so as to not have DEI get threatened whenever the revenue is set, because it is actually part of the revenue generation. Because what I'm seeing is that DEI work often is thriving when there's enough food for there to be scraps at the table for folks who look like me. But as soon as the food starts to get low, the scraps start to disappear. Suddenly the black box disappears. So you remember that. How do we solve for that?
Now, I know you're looking at Ashanti, but can I just listen a bit? And I don't know if we'll be counting and everybody. I would not take my job because, I asked about this because 2 DEI practitioners that were pre-existing were inside HR. And so I had to make very sure that I was going to sit outside. So I have my own department. I report to the global CEO, and we have the opportunity to be very much intertwined with our revenue generating centers, right? Even though we are not, that's not our main purpose. And I actually think that is the evolution of this work. right? Now, if there's a situation where you have the head of both of these going concerns in one person, right, I think it makes it different. But if these are two different professionals, I do believe that it is better to have, these going concerns separated for that purpose and others. But I'll pass it along now.
Yes, and I love the realness of the question because that is a reality and that is what we see often. I think from me and my seat in terms of how we continue to ingrain it in the business is one, continue to anchor on values. That shouldn't change just because we have less money. But two, we have done a great job of integrating DE&I to the business through our partnerships with our CEO and our co-presidents, right? And so when we talk about our capital market space, we have a consistent approach around engaging with diverse banks, minority banks, and things of that sort. When we talk about our sales organization, how they're showing up, our pre-need area, the annual sales meetings and things of that sort, that is a part of their expectations and what they need to do to perform. That is all direct revenue generating, right? And so it's ingrained in the business so much so that we don't have to spike it out as something different. Right? It's a part of the discussion. When we talk about priorities for the year, it's a part of the discussion. When we're having our quarterly town halls, it's a part of the discussion, right? And so that is something that continues to be encouraging to me. And I would challenge my peers where it isn't so connected on the business and it is focused just on the people and the talent to start to be involved in those conversations, start to do the research and share the connection points between DE&I in the business, and also create the argument that the workforce is changing. So quite frankly, you don't include it in the business, you're going to get left behind because this future generation, they are not playing, they know what they want, and it is expected that DE&I is the core of what you do. So if you don't get on the trend, you're going to get left. And that's just the reality of how the world is continuing to shift in that. So
I'm going to let Trey react, then try to get in one or two more questions.
Thanks, Matt. So I would say this. So the reason a lot of times those programs fail, those initiatives fail, is because they become something that we do with something instead of something that we become, right? It's the same thing with voting. One of the things that we try to push out when we're working in civic engagement is not try to get people to vote, but to become voters. It's a totally different thing, right? Identity leads to belief, that leads to values, that leads to behavior. And so you start to watch if it's not becoming our identity as people in a organization which has a collective identity, then it's only just doing it. So it does. So we start to look at it in this way. What is my individual role in a DEI structure? What are the beliefs, tenets, and things like that I need to practice as a leader within the organization, as a staff person? By that, I also need to do that at home. Like that, I also need to do that in my community. Now, the rest of my colleagues are also doing the same. That's how we affect neighborhoods. That's how we affect communities. That's how we affect society. So that's usually the typical. You can start looking at it. That's why we always try to focus on the individuals before we start putting out mechanisms and all the different methods and practices. We just look at what is it they need to do first, and that starts everything else. So look at the being more so than the do.
I'm going to give you the final question.
Well, you all said just so much I could respond to it all. Thank you for your wisdom. I do have a question, however, regarding the sustainability of DEI. Like, do you think it needs to morph into something else that is more substantive in the size of an organization as opposed to alleviating a separate idea program? The second thing is, what if this was in your experience, there's not just DEI programs, but making policy changes? I find that programs in policies have a little more sustainability.
Yes. Can I react? I just want to react to what part of your question about it changing into something else. And I don't know if this is the right answer, but what comes to mind now is the idea that I'm privileged to be a DEI officer for the organization. And to me, there's also an expiration date, right? I don't want to be the DEI officer forever. If I don't either find someone who is even more incredible and brilliant than me to be the successor, ultimately, I'd love it if the organization would get their act together and implement it in every aspect of what they do. So it's just good business. It's not an initiative on somebody's desk or a strategy that's part of the business strategy, but it is in everything that we do. And, that starts with the CEO, it starts with our senior leadership team, our board, everyone who holds some type of responsibility individually, collectively in that organization. That's what I'd love to say.
Not pushing back, but it's
No,
always been business.
I need that. Yeah.
So one of the things that I want to say, and then I'll turn it over to you, Kimberly, is that the reality is D&I has continued to evolve since we started to do it, right? So remember in the beginning, it was just diversity, and it was diversity inclusion. Now it's diversity, equity, inclusion. And so I think that how we continue to support the landscape will always evolve and change. And I think we're now in a period where it's going to evolve. But the intent and the value of it continues to remain through all those various time periods. But it will need to change depending on how the landscape changes, right? And so you see even some organizations calling it diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. You see some organizations saying the chief culture officer, right? And so I think you can call it whatever you want to call it, but the true intent and the value of it, I don't think is going to change or wither away or go away. It just may look and feel like something different as the needs of the workforce continues to change, right? And so a lot of my colleagues are looking at the work, like how do we make it? Are we going on time? Okay, I'll stop right there.
No, finish up. Cordell's friend, let's go.
I'll just say DEI and the DNA, right? We need to have a mindset shift. I was telling them about a training program that I designed at PRH to try to get people to literally think about these things, these considerations, kind of interrogate their processes and procedures at every juncture in their decision-making process. Doesn't matter if I still have a job related to DEI. If we could get our workforce to think in this way and understand the value of what all of us bring to the table.
And I know Trey's going to force it. Go ahead.
That's all. It's not. DEI is not a professional development program.
Programs.
Right. That's what should. And so we got to keep that in mind. I think, but people, when we start looking at it from a training standpoint and what have all different processes, it's really about, as I said before, how do you push it into your identity, like Kimberly's? How do you push it into your DNA? Because after that, things do evolve. Mm-hmm. It becomes part of culture. The things that we see and the things that we don't see. It's a part of how you interact. And that's the key. So, yes, it will evolve. And hopefully for the better.
Thank you for your wonderful activity. And thank you for in the gift of your perspective, your time, your joy, and thank you for reminding us that even in this important work that we still need to take care of ourselves and build community together. Take ourselves. Trey, Ashanti, Kimberly, thank you so much. Appreciate it. Have a wonderful evening.
And your picture here. Yes, picture.
Oh, we don't go to just. Why should we win?
I know that for what the people have, I think it's clear.
It's a fascinating.